Every gilded cage is built with walls of comfort. The only question is what you're paying for them.
Welcome to The Explainer, where we turn complex source material into clear visual stories. All right, today we are diving deep into a really fascinating and pretty controversial idea. The claim that Hollywood and the media aren't just telling stories, they're building our reality using a kind of hidden language. Let's get into it.
So let's just kick things off with this really powerful claim from our source material. The idea here is that the entertainment we consume might be doing a whole lot more than just helping us unwind. It's suggesting that these stories could be programming our understanding of the world, and we don't even know it's happening. So, how on earth would a system like that even work?
Well, to really understand how these narratives get shaped, you first have to look at the system that brings them to us. Our sources argue that before a single scene is ever filmed, the very structure of the media landscape is already filtering what you and I get to see. And it all starts with a simple question: who owns the stage?
You know, it feels like we have endless choices, right? Hundreds of channels, countless websites, all the streaming services you could want. But what the sources are telling us is that this feeling of choice, it's mostly an illusion. The huge majority of what we watch, what we read, and what we listen to is actually controlled by just a tiny handful of massive corporations.
And here they are. According to our source material, these 5 companies, plus huge players like Netflix, basically own the entire media landscape. I'm talking news networks, movie studios, publishing companies, you name it. The sources use this great metaphor. They call it an enormous kraken of corporate media, where all these different tentacles ultimately trace back to the exact same body.
And this is really the key question, isn't it? If just a few companies control the entire information highway, how does that actually change the stories being told? Well, to answer that, our sources point to this really powerful idea that explains how information gets systematically filtered. It's called the propaganda model.
Okay, so this model, which is laid out in our sources, says there are basically 5 big filters that any piece of news has to pass through before it ever gets to you. It's not some secret backroom conspiracy, it's just how the system is built. For example, the very first filter is ownership. Media companies are for-profit businesses, so of course they're going to promote content that's good for business. Then there's advertising. Ads pay the bills, so you're probably not going to see many stories that make the big advertisers look bad, right? When you put all 5 of these filters together, you get what the model calls manufacturing consent, where we all just kind of end up agreeing with the status quo because it's the only view we ever really see.
So that's the system. That's the hardware. But the influence isn't just structural. It's also psychological. So let's shift gears and look at the stories themselves. Because to really influence people, you need a story that hits them on a deep, almost primal level. And that's where archetypes come in. I mean, really think about it. Why do we cry at movies? Why do we always root for the underdog? How come certain characters just feel timeless? Well, according to our sources, the answer is buried deep inside our own minds, in a part of the brain that's millions of years old and comes with, let's say, pre-installed software. Ideas like the hero going on a journey, the wise old mentor, the big bad villain, these aren't just cliches from your English class. Our sources explain them as Jungian archetypes, these universal patterns that are hardwired into all of us, into our collective unconscious. So when a movie uses these archetypes, it's not just telling you a story, it's activating a program that's already running in your head.
This quote from one of our sources is just a fantastic way to think about it. You never had to learn how to shiver when you get cold, right? It's an encoded, automatic response. Well, the argument here is that we have similarly encoded psychological responses to certain kinds of stories. And stories that tap into these archetypes can kind of sneak past our critical thinking and talk directly to our gut feelings. All right, so now that we get the raw power of these stories, let's go a little deeper down the rabbit hole. Let's explore the claims that Hollywood actually embeds a deeper, symbolic language into its movies. This is where the source material gets into the really esoteric stuff, arguing that a lot of what we see on screen has hidden layers of meaning.
The key to unlocking all of this is a field called semiotics. It's just the study of signs and symbols and how they create meaning. I mean, a red octagon means stop, right? But there's nothing about that shape or color that inherently means stop. We've all just agreed that's what it means. Well, the sources claim that Hollywood uses a much more complex semiotic language, one that pulls from ancient and even occult traditions.
So this slide breaks down a few of the big recurring themes that the sources point out. You've got Gnosticism, which is this ancient idea that our reality is actually a prison or a simulation. Sound familiar? Think The Matrix or The Truman Show. Then there's symbolism tied to Saturn worship,
which supposedly represents control and limitation, often through things like black cube imagery. And finally, the fallen angel archetype, the rebel who brings forbidden knowledge. The core argument here is that these aren't just random themes, they're part of a deliberate, symbolic conversation happening right under our noses.
So, this all leads to a huge question. If these really complex, sometimes pretty dark themes are being woven into our entertainment, why? What's the point? This is where our sources get into two of the most controversial ideas in all of media analysis. This is the fundamental debate right here. Are filmmakers just using cool, old themes to tell better stories, or is something way more intentional happening? This question takes us straight to the ideas of subliminal messaging and the much more provocative theory of predictive programming. Okay, so what's the difference? Subliminal messaging is about trying to influence a small individual choice, like buying a certain brand of soda, and our sources point out that the science says its effects are pretty weak. But predictive programming, whoa, that's a whole different animal. It's described as a conspiracy theory that alleges media is used to slowly warm us up to future events. The idea is to desensitize us so that when these things actually happen in the real world, we're less shocked and more likely to just accept them. And the sources point to a ton of examples as potential evidence for this. The Simpsons is the classic one, right? It's famous for seeming to predict the future. Or the 2011 movie Contagion, which laid out a global pandemic scenario that felt eerily familiar a decade later. Now, it's really important to say that the source material presents these as circumstantial evidence for what it explicitly defines as a conspiracy theory.
Now, take everything we've just talked about, the media consolidation, the psychological tricks, the narrative programming, and imagine plugging it into a supercomputer. Because the new frontier of this perception architecture, according to our sources, is being built with artificial intelligence.
This table from our sources shows a really scary evolution. I mean, we went from mass persuasion, like old propaganda posters that everyone saw, to AI-driven micro-targeting that can create a specific manipulative message just for you based on what it thinks are your psychological weaknesses. And now with things like deepfakes, AI isn't just trying to influence reality, it can actually create it from scratch.
So how does this actually work on you and me? Well, the algorithms on our social media feeds are basically designed to be addictive. They exploit our biases by only showing us stuff we already agree with. They trigger really strong emotions like anger or outrage because they know that keeps us engaged and scrolling. They create these little dopamine loops, just like a slot machine, to get us hooked. And the end game, according to the sources, is to create an illusion of autonomy, to make you feel like you're in total control, when really your reality is being carefully managed to get you to behave in predictable ways. And this leads us to the final, really heavy conclusion from our source material. The claim is that we're moving beyond just trying to change public opinion. We're entering a new phase where AI and algorithms are literally becoming the operating system for reality. They are architecting our shared experience by controlling the information we use to build our world.
Which leaves us with one last, really provocative question to think about. As the line between what's real and what's a simulation gets blurrier and blurrier, who's writing the code? It's a question that challenges all of us to be more critical, more aware of the stories that are constantly shaping our lives. Thanks for watching.